Ask away.
All right, this is from Juliet Jake. He wanted your opinion based on a recent vlog where VOD, sorry, where you were talking about the differences between WoW and Final Fantasy, with Final Fantasy not making you have to do things, but WoW does. His counter argument to that is that he disagrees in that point. In Final Fantasy, you do have certain duties in order to progress the MSQ, and personally, he would rather not, but I have to do them, and he wanted your thoughts on that topic, basically the duties for progressing the MSQ.
Which duties is he referring to? Do you know?
I wish I knew. He didn't show up today, so I couldn't ask for more information.
I would have to get him on next week, or like maybe some other thing, because I would have to know what duties that is, because I think the only duties that he could possibly be referring to in terms of what you had to do in order to continue the MSQ was at ARR, when at some point you had to stop because you had to go do the Crystal Tower, which I would say was part of the story. It was still part of the MSQ. It was just a different vein of the MSQ, and if you didn't know anything about the Crystal Tower, subsequent storylines would make a lot less sense, especially when you get to Heavensward. If you don't know anything about the Elegans from the Crystal Tower, you're going to be very lost when you get to Heavensward's like final patches, or middle patches really, because you don't know shit about what's actually going on there. As for dungeon trials and trials in general that you have to complete, again, I would say very much part of the story, so not really duty related, because the dungeons tell a story in and of themselves that is related to the MSQ. So in that regard, I again, because we have to define what we call duties, correct? Duties is when you do things that is completely unrelated to the story, but you have to do them because the story is not yet available. So for example, dailies and world quests in World of Warcraft. Most of the dailies and the world quests will have nothing to do with the actual story, but you have to do them because the actual story is behind the time gate that can't be accessed yet. So in that regard, you know, you're basically wasting your own time, and they're wasting your time as well, because you're doing things that you don't necessarily want to do. I've never viewed dungeons as a duty, specifically if the dungeon... So, for example, would we say that... what's the plague dungeon called again at the end of Bastion? Oh my god.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
You go through the portal right at the end of Bastion. It's like Maldraxxus attacking Bastion. What the fuck is that dungeon called?
Necrotic Wave.
Necrotic Wake. Yeah, the Necrotic Wake. I do not view the Necrotic Wake as an ending to the story of Bastion as a duty. I mean, it's the ending of the story, so you get to see the end in dungeon form. I've always loved that. I would like to see more of that. I actually think more quest lines in World of Warcraft should end in a dungeon, because dungeons are sort of a nice break from the monotony of questing, but then also a really nice way to end the story. So I would have to talk to Julian first and sort of find out what he views as duties to answer that question.
Yeah, I don't have much of a grasp on Final Fantasy. I've been just learning as you're streaming and when I can catch the time to watch. But with respect to the portion on WoW, I do think that dungeons have been kind of just ancillary parts to the quests. I mean, occasionally they'd get like a final quest to go into that dungeon, but at the same time, you would get the quest to go back and go to the next area. It wasn't like you had to go into that dungeon to then progress to the next zone. It would have made sense if you had to go into Necrotic Wake and stop the Maldraxxus invasion to then access Maldraxxus.
Yeah, I mean, you have to stop the Maldraxxus invasion before you can actually go to Maldraxxus, because if you don't, technically Maldraxxus will overrun Bastion and win, right? So you have to stop it, but you don't have to, because you could just leave, go to Maldraxxus and continue questing there, and never do the never finish the dungeon for Bastion. So I would love to see Blizzard make those dungeons mandatory before you can move on. In fact, I would like to see Blizzard make a lot more things mandatory about the story. Unless Blizzard wants to change the way they tell the story. Unless Blizzard wants to go back to World of Warcraft where the story was really an afterthought and most of the story was presented in the books and the game really didn't tell that much of a story, then fine. Don't worry about it, who gives a fuck. But if they're gonna make the story important, but then also allow people to basically just crash through the story without knowing what the fuck happened, then why are you even spending that much time on the story in the first place? Why make all of these cutscenes and all of these interlude conversations when people literally just skip them and move on and they're not really that important based on how you design your game? You know, so it's sort of a priority thing. When I play Call of Duty, I don't give a fuck about the story of Call of Duty, and I would be very annoyed if they made story compulsory in order for me to shoot other people in the face. Or what I do in Call of Duty is just loot things and die. But I would be annoyed if they pushed story down my throat, because I don't play Call of Duty for a story. I play Call of Duty because I want to pew-pew. Well, I want to collect things and then pew-pew and then die, but I still want to, that's what I want to do. So you either focus on the story and hard focus on the story and make the story mandatory, or you stop focusing on the story and then you can treat the story as the stepchild, right? Which is what World of Warcraft does right now. The story is sort of, they pretend like the story is important, but then at every fucking turn, they treat the story as the red-headed stepchild, which is not fair, you know? It's not fair to those of us that actually give a fuck about the story. Because if they told me that they're not going to care about the story anymore and that the story is only going to be really put into novels, that saves me $15 a month, right? I can keep up with World of Warcraft simply by reading the novels. It's probably also going to mean more novels every single year for World of Warcraft, which is also great. I love reading books. What I don't like is when you tell me you're going to give me a story in the game for $15 a month and $60 box price, but then also you're going to give me the story in the box, and if I don't read the box, I'm not really going to understand the story, but somehow you pretend like the story matters, when really it doesn't matter. So that would sort of be it. Renee asks something similar to you, Morny, in that, Aklon, how much do you think D&D influenced World of Warcraft? Like, the more I play D&D, I love D&D, the more I realize how much World of Warcraft functions like a massive D&D session. So, Renee, I've had this conversation before, but that's literally what World of Warcraft used to be. Chris Metzen is a massive D&D geek. So he effectively created every single expansion in the past for World of Warcraft. Expansions were sort of like one-shots, right? That's what they were. They were one-shot D&D campaigns. They were sort of loosely linked together by the overarching world, but very similar to something like Wizards of the Sword Coast, right? Where Baldur's Gate is but one story in this massive universe, but every single Baldur's Gate is sort of a one-shot within this universe. And whenever it doesn't suit them, they'll just fucking change it. They'll just change it in another game. So Icewind Dale had its own story that it told. Baldur's Gate has its stories that it tells. There'll be some overlap, but at the end of the day, if Icewind Dale wants to tell a story that directly contradicts the story of Baldur's Gate, and Wizards of the Sword Coast really want that story, they'll just go ahead and do it. And that's exactly what World of Warcraft used to be. Whenever they felt like they really wanted to retcon something because they thought of a cooler story, they would just go ahead and do it. Yeah? Because every single expansion was effectively a one-shot D&D campaign. Then Steve Denuser comes in, and suddenly he wants to tell a sort of continuous story, right? He wants a story where every expansion follows on every previous expansion. The problem is, you can't do that. You can't take a one-shot campaign, yeah, or a collection of one-shot campaigns and suddenly turn it into a long-term campaign if your one-shot campaigns was never designed to be that. So let's say, for example, you have a series of one-shot campaigns where you basically allow your players the rule of cool in every single one of them, yeah? and they effectively become stupidly fucking overpowered because they're mixing and matching and just rule of cooling their way to the finish line. And then suddenly in the final one-shot campaign, you decide, all right, guys, from now on, next week's campaign is actually going to be a continuation of this week's campaign. But I'm also going to take all of the other campaigns that we've done and connect them to this campaign. So suddenly your characters are basically going to be the collection of 9 different one-shot campaigns moving forward. That's not going to work. It's going to be messy because you're taking 9 individual stories and trying to tell a single unified story. It was never designed to be that. So what Steve Denuser should have done is bring an end to the one-shot campaigns and then start a brand new story that can now sort of continuously move forward. That would have been better. The problem is he sort of went, right, we're in the middle of a one-shot campaign, but now I want to tie all of the one-shot campaigns together, so I'm just going to do that. See, well, they weren't ever designed to be tied together in the way that you wanted to. The way you want to tie them together, they weren't designed for that. So it's not going to work, right? It's just not going to work. You're never going to be able to do it unless you take a lot of time. So I think if Steve Denuser took another 3 expansions and slowly but surely connected all of the old world with his new ending, that could have worked. But they didn't. They sort of wanted to bring an end to it in one expansion by tying everything together and then finishing it in one. You can't do that, right? So that would be the biggest problem, right? For me, at least. Citizen Ben, good luck, bro. I don't know what the fuck Dead Ends is, but good luck.